I have the recording started.
Okay. I'm not able to get in for some reason.
Can you see the agenda on the screen, Tom?
No, I can't see anything. I can't get in. Let me try one more time and then I'll hand it over to Gary if I can't do it.
Okay.
I got it now. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is the November 15th meeting of the PR&D committee, Dunn County. Are all members of the committee present? Looks like it from what I can see.
Yes, they are all here.
So we have a quorum. So I'll call the meeting to order. Approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Could I have a motion?
I'll move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Could I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Monica. Thank you. Any questions or corrections? Okay, all in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Do we have any public comments today?
Yes, we have a member of the public that is coming up to the podium.
Okay,
Good morning. My name is Luisa Gerasimo. I work as a human development and relationships educator for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and I am housed right here in Dunn County, upstairs. I know some of you were up late because I left here at 9:20 something and I saw a lot of cars here. So good morning to all of you. Thank you for letting me address you briefly on the topic of ADUs, accessory dwelling units. I work as the current leader of the Housing Action Team, which is a part of the Health Done Right. That committee came out of a community health needs assessment. We have just done another one, and all the numbers are not officially granularly crunched yet, but it looks like in Dunn County, housing rose basically to the very top for many of the respondents as a concern for community health, either for themselves or their neighbors. I work with a lot of parents and families in Dunn County, and I hear about housing needs constantly. Housing and childcare come up all the time. And most of the people in our housing action team, which has been meeting for many years and paused when we had the big housing study done, many people have mentioned additional dwelling or accessory dwelling units as being one way that we could take a small bite out of our 3,000 plus units that we are short for homes in our county. So I'm here on behalf of the Housing Action Team, HAT, as we call ourselves, to support the idea that it would be helpful for us to have at least that inroad into making more homes for our neighbors. And I speak to you as a person that worked a very long day, but went home and slept in my own bed. And so I'm here bright and early with all of you. Most of you probably went home and also slept in your own beds. And I want you to consider the advantages for older people to have young people nearby as they get older and things are harder, to have somebody come in and help or check on them, or just to be company. We know that loneliness and lacking a sense of belonging are serious health issues in our nation and also here in Dunn County. I also want to mention that for those of you with a rural background, many of you are familiar with the hired man's house is what we called it when I was a kid. That's obviously really gendered, but the point is that farmers often need a person to help them. And many times those people live in essentially what is an ADU on the farm. Other cities have adopted this and had quite a lot of success. I have an aunt and uncle that recently sold their place in Los Angeles and moved to San Francisco, where they bought a 3-up. So they have a younger generation and their grandchildren living in the same building. The house they sold had an ADU in LA in a tiny lot that was between two taller buildings. And that turned out to be something that added a lot of value to their building that they sold, so that they were able to buy a really nice building with multiple generations to help take care of each other. So on that note, I will turn it back to you guys for the business at hand. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for your comments, Louisa. Any other comments? Is that it?
I'm not seeing any other ones, Tom.
Okay. All right. We have no public hearing today. So our next agenda item is staff reports, beginning with the Register of Deeds. Heather?
Good morning. Nothing to add, I guess, if there's any questions.
Any questions to Heather's report?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor
Yes.
Bjork, question. Why do we have a net loss? Or it said they're like, 4,837? And usually you always got a surplus that you give back to the general fund. Is it just too much going to the state or more doing less walk-ins and more just emails and that kind of stuff?
No, it would be, just the recording volume that we're seeing, just fewer documents being recorded with the downturn in the real estate, in the housing market. We don't have any control over that, what we see. So this year has been very, very slow. Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Heather. Let's go on then. I think, what's next? Survey Division? Mr. Carlson?
Yes. Yep. So I have my report up on the screen. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I guess one thing I'll just expand on briefly is I gave a presentation at UW Stout. I forget when it was now, it's in the report. There were two different sections of a site engineering course, 2 hours at a crack with like a 20-minute break in between. So it was a long stretch, but the students were very engaged, asked a lot of good questions, and I think it was very well received. I've done this every year for the last few years now, so it's been a good thing. Some public outreach from the county. So, yep. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for doing that, Tom.
Yeah,
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
you're welcome.
I have a question, Supervisor Kinnear here, Mr. Chair. Tom, I know it takes time when you do certified survey maps and so forth. I'm just curious, you've been getting a lot of maps of survey lately. There's 18 this time. Could you briefly explain what they are? And then is that as a big a workload as CSMs?
So yes, so a map, a survey, is a certified map. The misconception by the public and others is that a map, a survey is not as good as a certified survey map. Certified survey maps get recorded at the Register of Deeds office. They have to comply with state statute. Certain recording requirements. Typically, certified survey maps are used when you're dividing property, and the County Land Division ordinance requires them to be prepared. If say you just have 40 acres, a good example for where a map of survey would be used is if you have 40 acres, you just bought it, there's no fences around it, and you and the neighbors are unclear where the lines are. You hire a surveyor, they do a boundary survey. You're not creating a new parcel, you're just doing a boundary survey of something you own, putting iron pipes at the four corners. By state or Wisconsin administrative code says that a surveyor preparing a boundary survey has 60 days to file a map in the office of the county surveyor, get it on public record. So they prepare a map, they put their stamp, signature, seal, date on that map. There's a certification statement on there saying this map is true and correct to the best of their knowledge, belief, and ability. And that map gets put in the public record in the county surveyor's office. It's not recorded at the Register of Deeds. So it's still a certified map available to the public. We post an image of that out. It's searchable out on the county GIS website. I don't do a thorough review of maps of survey. Number one, we don't charge a fee to review them, but I do have to review them at a very high level, just make sure that the caption on the map is correct, the right section, town, and range, so I can index it properly. If I discover an issue with some data on the map, then I'll call the surveyor and ask them to revise it. But I don't do a very thorough review. I don't run lot closures. I don't, give it a thorough review just because I'm not being reimbursed for that. And I guess my time is valuable. So as far as numbers, typically this 18 is a little bit skewed. We acquired a whole career of records from a local land surveyor. Um, I won't mention any names, but I'm sure you know who that is. So we've been finding that some of those maps are not that were never put in the public record. These records go back to the 1960s. So as time permits, I'm going through those files, identifying the maps that are missing and scanning them, indexing them, getting them in the system. So of those 18, I don't have it broke down, but there's probably 4 or 5 that were from local surveyors recently. The remainder has been these ones that we're cleaning up. So that number is quite high for that reason. Typically, we don't get 18 in 1 month.
Yeah, a couple of things just for everybody else, that this is all on his initiative, that he's taken this to update basically and make things more accurate. It isn't something that someone else might have gone out and looked for, but that's really good job. And secondly, I'm wondering if you should be reimbursed for this, something to think about in the future. It's your time. So thank you for doing a good job and getting things up to date, and consider that in the future reimbursement.
Mr. Chairman, a question for
Yes.
Tom.
Yeah, Gary.
I'm just kind of confused. If they're doing a title search or, for land you want to buy, usually they go to Register of Deeds. Are they being mistaken by not going to you also? There might be something there that shows up that nobody's aware of.
If you're doing a title search, you do need to go to the Register of Deeds because we don't have title documents in our office. But a lot of times the title documents refer to a survey. Not always, but a lot of times they do. So the records we have in our office may help supplement the research they're doing at the Register of Deeds office. In other words, if they're pulling a deed up in Heather's office and it's referring, direction and distance to an iron pipe, direction and distance to an iron pipe, or they even reference the legal description, was based on a map of survey by Joe Smith dated XYZ, then they come to my office and want to get a copy of that. So the records in my office supplements the records at the ROD. But my records are not a standalone for doing a thorough title search. You could not do a title search in my office.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Gary? Okay, let's go. I've lost audio, so I don't know if you can hear me.
Next up, Tom, will be Ann.
Yeah, okay, Ann.
Morning, everybody. So I did have a longer report this time. I had a lot of things that I probably could have added in here. I just wanted to mention that we had the multi-county workshop for BOA. Mike was there, all of our staff, and I also wanted to give a shout out to our corporation council because all of them were in attendance at this, and all of the planning and zoning staff as well. I think it went pretty well, but maybe Mike has something he'd like to say about it, but the next BOA is scheduled next week. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, I can surely answer them.
Yeah, you might have guessed, I do have a comment, and I think she could be a director of some new movies or shorts and stuff, because she made it fun. We had a mock, not trial, but a mock BOA meeting, and it was really cool. So you brought people in, and she did a great job, and everybody was engaged, even at the end, which was crazy. So, and it's nice getting this kind of stuff to see what's going on in the BOA. So, thanks.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, oh, go ahead, Tom.
No,
Sorry.
you go ahead.
Oh, just to mention that there was like a kind of a role-playing section that we did, and this was entirely new. So Lynn Markham from the Center of Land Use Education puts these on quite frequently. And most of these trainings are available online if anybody's ever interested in them. But this one, we tried something unique. We brought in some people from St. Croix County, from their BOA and their former director, and they were the participants in this role playing. And I think that was really well done. So happy about that.
Question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So how serious, Ann, was, or that the, Rock Creek plans on engaging in county zoning? Are they just kicking the tires, or are they actually really serious about it?
Hard to say. I think they think there's a certain level of kicking the tires going on. So we did attend that meeting. Chase was there, and so was our planner, Tammy Traxler. It's kind of just a Q&A session at their town meeting. They have asked us to come back to another meeting to discuss it a little more seriously, and possibly move forward. I think that's all I can really say for them.
And one other thing, Mr. Chair, please.
Yes.
I noticed you talked about your conference and model shoreland ordinance. The state kind of has limited us, haven't they, on what we can do? So what's a model shoreland ordinance here?
So the model shoreland ordinance is put out by the DNR. It's not on a set schedule, but they just make some updates and changes as they go along. Very normal housekeeping sort of things for shoreland. They want to keep up with changes on the state level, different requirements. There have been some things that change. Nothing that I can think of that would be really drastically changing, but some of the things in our ordinance that could be, there's some things that could be cleaned up. And we'd like to see that model ordinance for shoreland, and use that to kind of guide our process.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Ann, or Ann, any other comments? Okay. Land and water. Chase.
Morning, everyone. The report in the packet is a glimpse at what we're working on, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. One thing I would add at the very end would be if you watch any local news over the last week, I was asked to represent Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association when the administrator of the EPA came to Huntsinger Farms last week, and I was invited to sit at that roundtable. So I spoke on behalf of land and water conservation for across the state, but clearly representing Dunn County as well. Just looking at their investing in rural America, from on-farm conservation, water quality, climate, that sort of thing. So I spoke on basically counties, land and water conservation and environmental services in particular. We're kind of at the forefront of a lot of requests and demands, and we're at limited capacity. So tried to express gratitude for what funds do come down through the federal government. So 319 grant funds, which come through our notice of discharge process, targeted runoff management, and other conservation related funding, but also that we're being asked to do more and more. So I don't know, 2 minutes of fame. So.
That's great, Chase. Any questions from anyone? Okay, then that's our staff reports. Thanks again, everybody, for excellent reports and good discussion. What's next on the agenda? I can't remember.
It would be the discussion, Tom, on proposed zoning changes regarding ADUs.
Yeah, okay. Ann, you want to lead us through that?
Yeah, so I might share my screen here, but I'll start off for now. So we've been talking about accessory dwelling units or additional dwelling units. We can kind of use both. At some point, maybe we should try to decide which one we're going to go with, but I have different thoughts on both versions. So essentially, these residential living units that are on the same parcel as another single family dwelling, and they are complete independent living facilities for one or more persons, and they can be detached or deep or attached to the home. Some of the things I'd like to discuss with the PRND as I've been kind of drafting these ordinance changes is where would we like to see ADUs and where would they make sense? And also some of the sanitary system requirements that may be attached to these, that seems to be getting complicated. So I do have Michelle here. She is our private septic system specialist person. I don't know, her job title does not fit the wealth of knowledge that she has about septic systems. So very lucky to have her. So essentially, I'd like to just kind of talk about the districts, the septic systems, and then maybe some of the standards, and I can bring those up on my screen. But I just kind of wanted to get that discussion going a little bit more before I really introduce some of these possible standards or we get too deep. And I don't know if anyone wants to have any questions while I bring this up or if we want to just wait. I don't know how to share my screen in Teams. That one. I have a lot of different documents going for these proposed changes. This is my most simplest version, or my most simple version, sorry. So I'm looking at additional or accessory dwelling units as either a permitted or principal use. We can get into that later. That would be allowed in the R2, R3, and GA zoning districts. I think we need to add a definition for ADU, and we need to add standards for ADU. And then we definitely need to address POUTs or private on-site wastewater treatment systems in relation to ADUs. So this is some sections of the ordinance that I think we could add some different language to address accessory dwelling units. I just have this as an example for now. I think this discussion would be better served to just kind of establish where we would have these. So in the GA district, one of the reasons I'm kind of recommending that we allow these in GA is that you can currently have more than just single family dwellings in GA. We do have provisions right now that allow a farm worker or families of farmers to have an accessory dwelling unit on the property at the moment. We don't currently call it an ADU, but that's essentially what it is. I think Louisa in her public comment mentioned farmhand homes, things like that. I think it would make sense there. R2 and R3 also allow for these. They have duplexes in R2, and then in R3 you have multifamily, so essentially apartments. So adding this to these districts wouldn't increase the density that would already be available necessarily, but it'd just be adding another housing option, and adding a little more clear language about what that is and what that means. At the moment, I have not included any suggestions for adding this to R1. So R1 allows for single family housing, does not allow for duplexes or multifamily. Additionally, the purpose and intent statement in the R1 district essentially just says this is an area for single family housing. It doesn't really address other housing needs. So if we were to consider adding it to R1, that would need to be changed. We would need to kind of make adjustments there. I feel like I should pause for some PRD discussion here, if that's all right.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Talk a little bit more about R1. I'm being dangerous these days and gathering lots and lots and lots of information about housing. And many of the applications that I've read about make ADUs a by right, whatever you call it. And many of the studies that I've looked at have R1, R2, R3 as appropriate locations for ADUs. And I'm really curious. I mean, I would be very supportive of looking at R1, R2, and R3. I think it's really needed. So say a little bit more about your concerns about R1.
Sure. So R1, essentially my only concern is that purpose and intent and the density. So the purpose and intent of R1 was essentially to create single family, and I'd like to bring this up on my computer here if it's actually here and read the purpose statement for R1. So the purpose statement for R1 is to identify those areas where predominantly single family residential development has occurred or will likely occur. So of course, this language is very straightforward. I mean, it's just, hey, we're creating a district for single family housing. There's no reason that the PRND or, could suggest changes to this purpose and intent statement. But I think we would need that to more or less justify this being a permitted by right use in that area. And I also am suggesting in this document too, that I don't have on the screen because I need to read my notes, that they be allowed as, like you said, the permitted by right. So it's just a simple zoning permit to get this. You don't have to go through a conditional use or have a hearing or have any special approval. It's just administrative, done through the zoning office. If you meet the standards, you're okay, you're ready to go. So that's where I kind of want to have that standards discussion with the PRND as well. Because I think the standards are going to be really important if we do a permitted by right.
May I, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
I just wanted to say that my intuition is the same as Diane's on this. I would like to continue a conversation about what it might look like to have it in R1.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mike.
Okay, and my gut says the opposite. It's pretty obvious in GA, R1 and R2. But to take something again and have people own the property and all of a sudden have it changed. Is it possible? Yeah. Is it possible to R1, R2, R3, GA? It's permitted. And R1 conditional. Those different combinations.
Yeah, I think that's, that would just be as simple as placing the use in a different section of the ordinance. There is a section just for special exceptions and conditional uses.
Yeah.
Could be placed there. Different standards could also be applied for different zoning districts. I think maybe, this might be a good segue into, maybe Michelle has some comments about septic systems in relation to this, if it would be okay for her to speak to that.
Yes, please.
So I guess specifically for the R1 district, a lot of the shoreland areas are R1 and they're very small lake lots. They were made before the 1 acre minimums. And right now I've seen quite a bit of difficulty in plumbers being able to install replacement systems on the properties that are currently there. So by adding a second dwelling on there, and some of those are actually turning into holding tanks, which is not ideal, especially when you're that close to the water. You like to think the best of people, but there's always that bad egg that, well, hey, here's an easy way to just put an outfall pipe out of the side of the tank. But, with these small lots, trying to add on to the existing building to make another dwelling unit or to have a detached dwelling unit, well, now you have to have a septic system for that one too. And if it's already a stressed lot in the beginning, and now you're taking up more space by having the second dwelling or adding on, I just don't see where there's enough room. And even in subdivisions that are not on lakes, a lot of those R1 districts, they don't have as suitable of soils, or they're limited by area topography, things like that, where you may have an area for a septic and its replacement. But if you start trying to place another building for another house and that one's septic, it gets to be very difficult, if not almost impossible, to put a second house and septic on that same property. And now you have the density in there. You have to worry about, well, how far away from wells do you have to be? It almost becomes a logistical nightmare.
And you mentioned around the lake, but earlier we were talking about lots that have already been created before our ordinance. So there are a bunch of lots that are less than an acre now that people can build on because they were already created. So allowing something in R1 at least, all of them maybe we need to think about with the standards, but in R1 it is something that would be really need to look at carefully. And as before, I kind of like to think of people have made the decisions based on what we've got going now. So if we're going to make a huge change, that it's important that we really think it through. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Sorry, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes.
There could be exceptions for shoreline districts. Yeah. Okay, because not all of R1 is lake, tiny, plotted in 1935 lots. And I understand the difficulty at the lake, but this is a larger picture, I think. Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, there are R1 lots that are, 5 acres, or they're flat and it's easy to place a septic, things like that. But I'm just trying to think with what I've seen out in the field, it's getting harder and harder. Plumbers are getting more and more stressed out trying to find replacement areas, and they're having to tell landowners, hey, you have to get a holding tank for your replacement. There's no room, or there's not enough good soil, not enough good length for a suitable mound or septic system. And so now they're stuck with a holding tank, and that's, the city of Menominee just raised the rates for the disposal of that sewage. So now they're doing, $300 plus every couple weeks, every month. That's a lot of money that landowners are not having to pay. So, just keeping that in mind for the future, so that these landowners aren't burdened with that stress and that cost.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a couple
Yeah.
of questions or just comments. I'm all for, because we spent a lot of time 7, 8 years ago, like you're getting our zoning all done to try to keep conflicting situations from affecting each other. That's why we got R1, and I'd be very upset if I had a nice house in R1, and all of a sudden there's multifamily right next to me. So I think R2 and R3 would be a great place to go. And I think the town, if they really wanted to, they could have that part like rezoned. Now, as far as general ag, why do we want a multifamily out in the country where we're trying to farm? I mean, because basically all it is a duplex, is what it is. You're adding that extra, dwelling there on the property, and you're talking about the hired man's house. Our hired man lived in our house. We fed him everything, so. And then the other question is, if there's 3,000, there's sort of housing, where are these people living right now? Because I don't think there's 3,000 people homeless in Menominee. Would be a comment.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Please.
I mean, the housing study did not indicate that these 3,000 housing units were for homeless people. These are for employers trying to hire people that they cannot now hire because there is no place for them to live. It's a way to deal with us older folks who might like to move to something a little easier for us to take care of. We don't have that kind of housing. I mean, if you look at the housing study in detail, I mean, it will share with you all of the reasons why by 2040 we need 3,200 additional housing units of all kinds. Big executive homes, little tiny 1,200 square foot homes. We need it all. I don't know if that answers your question, Gary.
Just one more comment, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I would like to see like more like duplexes or closer to the city for housing, because then you got city water, city sewer. You're a lot closer to where you want to work. You are a lot closer for the kids in school. We have some kids right now out in the country that spend an hour every day just on the bus before they get to school. And you got the shopping real close. You got like mass transit, Dunn County Transit. And back when we done for our township, for the county smart growth planning, we sent a survey out. And right next to clean water was to keep the area rural. That, to me, that don't mean like multifamily out in the country like that. So that's just my comment. And
And do you have any response, any reaction to that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, these general ag areas are made for farming. I mean, there's supposed to be a balance between residential and farm use out there. So right now, as the ordinance is written, you can have like, say, a duplex out there, or you could have 2 single family homes on your property with a farm. And we do see a lot of these. I mean, it's a very, very common thing. In order to do that, according to our ordinance, to get a permit for it, you need to have, there's those farm standards. So either an owner or operator can have that second dwelling, parent or child, or someone who works on the farm and gets 50% of their income. So if they can show this right now when they're trying to get their permit for this second structure, we can approve it. However, we have really no way to determine if it's going to stay that way. So if they sold 5 acres around those 2 houses, sold the farm off, we're never going to know who lives there. It's impossible for us to enforce this in the long term, which is kind of part of my reasoning for saying, well, do we really need to have these extra standards? How effective is it? And is it actually doing what we want it to do, which is to keep these areas rural? Another thing about general ag is that it does kind of seem like a default zoning district in a lot of these more rural areas that, they didn't want to do intensive ag or some of these preservation agriculture districts because the rules for those were so much more difficult to build a home. They wanted to allow some houses, but more acreage, keeping it rural. I think it comes back to that same intent. But I have seen towns that have just said, well, we didn't know what to zone it, so we just went with general ag. So that kind of comes into play a little bit too, but the majority of the people who have asked us about doing this are general ag zoned properties. Or, they're these smaller lots that can't be split any further. In general ag, once you get to that 8 acres, you really can't split it anymore. So if you lived in an R1 and you had 8 acres, well, you could split it as much as you like, but in general ag, you're really stuck there. If you want to have grandma live next door, that's just impossible. So it's really limiting there. But I just wanted to add that as part of the consideration of the conversation.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad it's added to talk about it, but I want everybody to think back 2015 or whenever it was. The zoning ordinance was put together with a whole lot of compromise, and it wasn't put together thoughtlessly. There are meetings after meetings with township people, with the county people, and I want you to keep in mind that now we've got a housing shortage that we knew about 10 years ago, and now we have the details on it, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. So I'm glad we're talking about it. But keep in mind, this wasn't just thrown together with no consideration for housing or for anything else. It's what the people decided in the end. So as we go along with that, I'll just keep my comments confined to this and not the entire housing thing.
I hope you didn't misconstrue my saying that GA was a default as saying this wasn't well thought. I'm just saying it was what we had available at the time and
No, I did
That's
not
what we have.
in any way. I did not in any way take it that way because I know that's the case. Yeah, it was the best. When you say default, sometimes it's just, well, okay, we got 5, which is the best one. It doesn't work great for us, but it's a compromise. And that's kind of the way I took what you're saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get
Yep.
it.
we're on the same page.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple
Yes,
more comments, and
Sure.
I'll be quiet.
It's all right.
This, like zoning, was put together over a lot of time, and we had a very smart man that was the chairman at the time, Bob Walters. And it was so much work that the PR&D committee actually took the zoning department out to a restaurant and, gave them food and drinks and that, or whatever, at our expense. I mean, just to show them that our appreciation. And getting back to GA, what concerns me, and it's probably not that great, is if you get so many people living in the country that aren't part of ag. I was talking to the state senator last year from Somerset, whatever his name is, and he farms. He said that there's actually a township up there that are trying to limit the amount of time you can be out in fields at night. It just, they don't understand farming, but yet because they have more people involved, it just kind of like a discrimination against the farmers because there's less people of the farmers that are actually, have a voice to be heard there. So there could be a conflict.
Okay. So you got a lot of stuff kind of dropped in the bucket, Ann. Any thoughts about what's next on this aspect of it?
So I think this really, helps kind of develop that conversation about what kind of standards we might want to use for this that can address some of these concerns with conflict that would maybe still allow this, but maybe, maybe we're looking at something like you have to have enough lot size to accommodate, the septic system. Maybe we're having it so that you need a minimum of acreage to build a second dwelling, or if you can, I think similar to the land division ordinance where we looked at, buildable area. And if you can show and you can demonstrate, yes, we can meet all the setbacks, we have room for a septic system and a replacement. Our septic system is sized appropriately, things like that. Why would we need to add an acreage limitation? So I think those are things we can, as staff, we can get some more standards recommended based on the conversation today and just keep moving this forward.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And I don't know, I agree with you. I mean, obviously we need standards to apply, particularly with regard to septic systems. And I don't know if this is exactly the place, but Ann and I have been talking a lot. I mean, both of you have addressed the fact that there was citizen input in the zoning process. We really seriously need to look at our comprehensive plan, and we need to engage the closest to the city towns, all of the towns, but closest to the city, and figure out where it is appropriate to build additional housing and what kind. We are not suggesting, I think, that we just sort of willy-nilly go ahead and change the zoning ordinance. This needs to be part of a bigger picture. And I don't think we have the picture at this point. We had a comment earlier this week from the town of Sherman about this. They certainly are interested in housing type issues. So I mean, we're not there yet. This, however, is a sort of small piece in that larger picture of where do we want housing and what kind of housing do we want and where do we want to grow. So I mean, I think that we should move forward with standards, but we do need to think about a bigger process of what do we want in Dunn County? And maybe people have changed their minds since whatever, 2014 or 2015. It's 2023, the last time I checked. And maybe there have been changes. Thank you, sorry.
Yeah,
my speech.
one last one. Just make sure everybody does know that the town of Menominee, the town of Red Cedar, and the city do have maps of growth, and they've actually got little bit more than a handshake agreement of how things are going to work. So that's in place and that's more recent. And while that might change, it's a starting point and it exists right now. And you're familiar with it, I think. Yeah.
I just have one thought to share.
Sure.
So a lot of times in some of these more complicated changes, a listening session might be beneficial, where the PRND could meet and invite like planners, committee members, community members, some of these town officials, just to have a discussion and just talk about it. I mean, it would be structured so that we can actually get some things done, but I do have kind of a toolkit for putting together a listening session like this. If this is something the PRND would like to explore, I'd be more than happy to put that together.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have a
Yeah.
question with Ann, please. What part of GA could be like rezoned? I mean, is that a possibility that instead of changing all these things, you got a GA like your 1:8 ratio? If you want to like have your family move closer, wouldn't that like you be, and the town's all for it, wouldn't that be a possibility without changing everything so much? Like rezoning be part of the conversation?
Yeah, so I think, even in the last 2 years that I've been here, I think a lot of the rezone requests have been converting general ag land. A few have been commercial, but in general, they've been moving to R1 or R2, mostly because they're trying to split those lots a little bit more, and allow for more housing. When we do those, as you know, we look at the town's future land use plan to kind of make those decisions. We really look at what the town thinks about development in that area. Is this prime farmland? Is this soil that needs to be protected? Or does it make more sense as residential? I think those things do come up when we do these rezones. So, yeah, that makes sense.
I really support the idea of a listening session or sessions. And I think that should be part of our comprehensive plan discussion also, but I think it would be really, incorporating that into this discussion would be really helpful. So I think if the committee agrees in general, let's make sure that we include that in our process at some point in time when we're ready, when it makes sense to do it. Anything else from the committee or from staff?
I have just one more thing, and I apologize, I'm dragging it out, but
No, that's all right, please.
I believe it is the next PRND meeting that we're planning to bring our public participation plan, our proposal for that, a timeline and some other information to the PRND. Just want to mention that because that's very similar to this listening session process, but that would be in relation to the comprehensive plan moving forward.
How do you see those interacting? And I mean, they're separate processes entirely, or are they?
They don't need to be. I just wanted to say that,
Yeah.
we've been developing, to kind of kick off our new comprehensive plan. We've been working on a new public participation plan to replace the old one. Getting some of these community members involved, getting the towns more involved. And I think I'm really excited to bring that to PRND next month, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that was coming.
Okay. We look forward to talking about it. Anything else from anybody? So what could we expect next on this end in terms of timeline and just discussion?
Well, I think that's up to the committee to direct me. I've offered to set up a listening session. I can also, dive more into some of these standards. I can also look into some other things too that might answer some of the questions that came up today, or maybe clear things up. It's up to you guys.
Perhaps if we looked at some of the standards, it might alleviate some fears we have or confirm whatever, but we would understand a little better what we're looking at. How does that sound?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, I think looking at the standards makes some sense, but I think simultaneously it would be helpful to move forward with thinking about a larger conversation with I mean, there is a housing work group currently operating, and Ann and I together are the conveners of a group that is looking at zoning. It's kind of not their responsibility. Most of the responsibility belongs here at PR&D, but that is a recommendation that group came up with, that we need input from builders, we need input from community members, and this is something that we all, this committee and other staff need to be involved in. So if we could simultaneously move forward with both, I know that's a lot, but I'd like to see some speed on moving forward with ADUs particularly. And again, I know it's a lot, but see if we can pull it off. I think you can.
I'd like to just respond to that if that's all right.
Sure.
So maybe this would be an opportunity for the housing work group, that group, and, you know, the zoning staff to kind of put together this listening session together. And really, I think the more hands, the better. And, you know, as that's going on, as we're organizing that, I think coming back to the next PR&D hearing, you know, I could bring the standards that I've kind of gathered and lead that discussion, but I think these can happen at the same time, so.
Okay. So when it makes sense, we will take a look at, as soon as practical, at the standards. I'd like, if we could, to include in that maybe just some scenarios where we would run through, here's some options for how development might happen using some of these standards. So we can kind of wrestle with the implications and the long-term consequences. Anybody else have anything? All right. Thanks very much, Ann, for your hard work on that. And staff. I think the next item is the legislative agenda. And am I right about that, Tom?
Yes, I'm gonna have Chase bring that up on the screen, the Word version, and that way, I guess we can review it and make changes on the fly if needed. So can you see that, Tom, on your screen?
Early, but yeah. Mhm. So remind me, people whose brains are a little bit less addled by fever. What is the timeline on approving the legislative agenda? It seems like we moved it back a little bit at the executive committee meeting. I can't remember exactly.
Believe it's January.
Okay, so to get this back to the to the executive committee by their meeting in January. Is that what you're saying, Tom?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So we do have a little more another opportunity to review it further if we feel like we need to. Have people had a chance to look at this at all since? And we didn't send it out with a packet, so I had to kind of dig through my files and find it.
What you have on the screen is basically last year's agenda, and then staff have made changes.
Okay.
Some of these are no longer applicable.
What?
I know. Go ahead.
No, so why don't you go through it then? Because you guys have looked at it and discussed what you think.
I'm going to turn it over to Chase.
Sure. So the bulk of the stuff under the land use section is related to land conservation related topics. I know there's a couple towards the end that are related to Heather and Register of Deeds. So Chairman Quinn, I don't know if you want to skip to those and give Heather an opportunity to address
Sure.
those
Sure,
things
yeah, let's
first
do
and
that.
then
Yeah, good idea.
wade through all of
Thank you.
mine.
Yep. So Heather, you want to address the ones that we put in dealing with your office?
Sure. So, letter I, there is the support for counties to retain a larger portion of the real estate transfer fee. And we were recommending the 50% of the fee be retained for the county. I see that that is moving forward. There's actually a vote in the Senate today. But it isn't exactly as what we had included in our resolution. I think we've talked about this before, but it was the actual fee itself would be reduced from $3 per thousand based on a sale price to $2 per thousand. And then there would be incremental or a tiered approach to the share being 30%, probably in 2024, 40%, up to then finally 50% split, but at the lower fee. So that's what's being voted on today in the Senate. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. So I don't know if we want to leave this. I guess that would leave this as it is, or, it might, we might know more by the time we actually have to finalize this plan as well too, but I guess I'm not sure
Yeah,
if you want to.
it seems like if it's if the legislation is passed, then we might as well take this out. If it hasn't, then we could continue to leave this in there in case there's a chance it would be relevant.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just leave it as it is for now, and excuse me, and I can keep you posted as to the status of that. Excuse me. So letter K, that's why I've brought Rachel in with me today. Rachel's our land information officer. I'm sure you're all familiar. And this is a request to support an increase in funding to the Wisconsin Land Information Program to maintain existing services, statewide mandated initiatives, and expanded services. These services increase the availability and accuracy of vital land records data to improve the efficiency of government and provided improved government services to both private sector and internal and external government stakeholders. So this, one of the ways that they're looking at, this is proposed, there isn't anything, these are just one of the options for a funding mechanism to increase the funding to the land information program, because it is based on the recording fees. And at this time, you can see in my budget that we're seeing fewer recordings, so our recording fees are decreased, which impacts the land information program. So one of the mechanisms is to increase the recording fees. So that's what's being looked at this time. So the recording fee currently is $30 per document. It's a flat fee. And then $15 of that is retained for the general fund. $8 is retained for the county land information fund. And then $7 is sent to the state land information fund. And this is where I'll let Rachel explain more, because again, that $7 that we send to the state, then we have the opportunity to apply for grants, and I'll let Rachel speak to that if that's all right.
So yeah,
Okay.
as Heather mentioned, yeah, so $8 is retained, and goes specifically within a land information fund, that those dollars are earmarked to go towards projects that get outlined in the land information plan, which is a plan that's developed every 3 years, with the input from, land information stakeholders, which are in this room, and then others that are outside as well. And that gets collaboratively developed every 3 years. And so those dollars can only go towards those projects. But then $7 goes back to the state to help fund some of those projects additionally as well. So the legislation that they're attempting to draft right now would increase the fee from $30 to $45. And what would happen though is that portion that goes to the county general fund, so is currently $15, that would stay $15. And what they're proposing then is for the portion that gets retained by the counties and within the land information fund that is in the county would go to $15. And then $15 would go back to the state to come back in the form of grants. So it would just be increasing those two buckets, the portion that the county can retain for these projects, and then the portion that comes back in the form of grants. So the portion that gets retained by the county's general fund would stay the same. But the overall fee would go up $15. So that has not been formally drafted, but it is being worked on right now with a senator. And so we expect that by the time you discuss this in January, is that there'll be something, a bill to actually cite.
I just wanted to add to the Wisconsin Register of Deeds Association has not taken a stance on this particular legislation at this point. So I can update you, later when I'm aware of, what they decide. And also, like Gary had mentioned previously too, just when you're talking about land records, it's throughout many different departments within the county that this funding can help benefit, projects like for the surveyor's office or, so it is not just our office, although we can all, through the Land Information Council that meets once a year, we can all request funding to come to help our departments as well. But there are certain benchmarks that through Rachel's plan that she has to meet and certain requirements that she has to meet as well. But just due to the lower recording fees, they need additional funding to maintain the priorities that have been identified in the plan.
Yeah, so the hope is that this increased funding would allow us to maintain those services. The services have grown since this program was developed in 2010. So the needs of the land records community have grown, but then those benchmarks remain the same. And then they have been expanding those as well. And the hope is that additional funding would then be able to get spread a little bit further to each of these departments. So.
Thank you. That's really a good explanation and a well-drafted resolution, I think. Anyone, just so that Heather and Rachel can get on with their day, anyone have any problem with including item K for now as it is in the agenda?
No problem. But I'd like to ask a question.
Sure,
What does
sure.
your division actually do? You said it's new processes or new procedure. Like, what are you actually, and do you get money from the tax levy, or is it all just got to go through the Register of Deeds?
Sure. So our department, the Land Information Division, is responsible for administering the projects that are outlined in this land information plan that the county has. Those include those statewide benchmarks, as well as the projects that are in the plan. But then we do have some funding that comes from levy to support programs that are outside of the land information program, but are related. For example, our office is in charge of rural addressing. So we'll issue addresses within the unincorporated areas. We also do GIS mapping for, as part of the Wisconsin Land Information Program, but also for, for the emergency management team. We'll make sure that the mapping that's within their dispatch systems is taken care of, addresses, road center lines. So they do have overlap, the program and our services. We also do have our real property lister in our office who reviews all of the documents that are recorded in the Register of Deeds office and transfers ownership based on those legals or notifies the drafters of those documents that they're in error and there needs to be something revised. And we'll also take those documents that are recorded in the Register of Deeds office and process them if they're a land division, and then update the records within the assessment system accordingly and the mapping that's available online of those property descriptions. So those functions aren't funded through this program, even though they are related, like they are mapping driven, and make records available to the general public and for our our internal stakeholders as well. So we do have some levy funding for those functions as well.
And just one more question, please.
Sure.
So what part do you have for the tax parcels? Are you engaged in that then, or is that part of your department? So you keep that straight for taxes?
We do, yes. So the process for maintaining those records is kind of twofold. So a document gets recorded in the Register of Deeds office. That comes into our land record system, the assessment system, and we'll review those. If it's a transfer, we'll just transfer the ownership and mailing information on those properties and move on. If it is a land division or a parcel reconfiguration, it'll come into our assessment system and we'll process it and create those new parcels or reconfigure them. And then we'll also update the mapping to match that tax parcel in the assessment system. So it is a two-part process. And then every January, we will share that information with the municipal assessors so they know this new subdivision came in, this new CSM was recorded, and now you have these two lots. And so then they can move those assessments accordingly. And then they'll come to the landowners in the form of a tax bill in December, but they'll be available online as well after we've processed them. So the online mapping will be available and the assessment information is available. So, yep.
Any other questions, comments? Again, is there any objection to, for now, including this provision in our agenda? Okay, so we'll leave it there and before we finalize it, we'll review it again. Anything else that, Heather, that you need to look at, or if you want to get going in your day, that's fine.
No, I have nothing additional.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Yep, thank you.
Chase, you made a few changes and suggestions.
All right, let's start at the top. Letter A references a long-standing conversation within the state of Wisconsin of trying to establish more reliable funding for local land and water conservation staff. The idea, maybe this should be in quotes, but the Wisconsin Legacy Fund is related to action that the state of Minnesota took several years ago with an increase in sales tax, portion of sales tax to go towards certain conservation or environmental programs. For that to happen in Wisconsin, it would take a constitutional amendment. So it has not been gained much traction, and frankly, it's maybe a battle that isn't willing to be taken at this time. With that said, though, I think the idea of creating some sort of long-term, sustainable, permanent funding to come back to counties, particularly for environmental programming and conservation programming, is something that should be discussed. So I guess if you're asking my suggestion, it was to leave this letter A in there, but I'd be happy to have a further conversation on it.
Okay.
I'll jump to letter B, just keep rolling. So again, related, but requesting full funding for all land and conservation staff according to a formula that's in state statute. This is just a never-ending battle. Every time the state budget comes up, there's lobbying efforts and work that surrounds this. We all feel good about we might get something, and then they take us out at the knees again. So there's more pressure put on the county levy to support local programming. So again, I think keeping this, I guess, request on this agenda is important because it is currently an existing state statute. Letter C. We're all maybe familiar with the water quality task force that took place prior to the pandemic. We've kept this on the agenda for the last few years, trying to, I guess, remind and hope that some of those provisions that were identified in the water quality task force could be taken up by the Senate. They passed the Assembly, but then the pandemic struck and everything ended. Right now, the way I understand a lot of the recommendations within the task force is that not all measures have been passed that were in there. Some have, And of the ones that have been passed, there may not necessarily be in the same form that they were originally drafted. So I think at this point, it's almost getting too difficult to track where the 2020 suggestions and task force suggestions are at, their level of different forms. So at this point, I'm suggesting we either reword this to some other, maybe some other descriptive language, or just remove it altogether. If you'd like to discuss that a little bit further, we can. Otherwise, I can get through the rest of them and come
Just
back.
any immediate discussion on that? Okay, go ahead, Chase.
Okay, letter D, update the state livestock sighting regulations and procedures, which is ACTP 51. Provide local governments with meaningful permitting, siting, and regulatory authority over very large CAFO operations that have significant impact on local environment and land use concerns. This was added in the last couple years, I believe, particularly related to the limitations that local units of government, particularly towns and counties, have on regulating or administering siting of large-scale livestock operations. Currently, the way the state law is set up is that a municipality has to provide a location for farms of all sizes. And I know particularly in Dunn County, we have concerns raised with us on a regular basis about particular farm sizing and the types of management and activities that are associated with that. So in the past, it was, I guess we were requesting to take a closer look at that and maybe provide for more local authority on those subjects. Letter E, establishment of a statewide groundwater quality program that provides annual funding and technical support to county groundwater testing and assessment programs. The original language included some reference to Wisconsin Geological Natural History Survey, which was part of the Water Quality Task Force recommendations. It's my understanding that the WGNHS has hired some additional staff, so we've made some ground on that. So I'm suggesting maybe eliminating some of the language in this in letter E. But I think the most important part is trying to establish some sustainable funding for this type of activity. Clearly, we've been fortunate in the last year, couple years with ARPA funds to provide some funding for groundwater quality monitoring. But as you know, those will sunset. We have some very valuable data, but it's important to continue that and keep that process going. I think citizens of the county are asking for, water quality information, and to have some funding and some technical support at the state level would be appreciated. Letter F, support increased farmer assistance by providing increased funding to farmers for conservation, including funding for managed grazing initiatives and producer-led watershed efforts. This year, I can speak to our farm, and I probably should have included this in my staff report. Came out after it was written, but both of our farm-led watershed groups did not receive the full funding that they were asking for, and that's been normal for most. I believe there's $1 million statewide, and there's over 49 requests this year. There's just not enough funding to support those efforts. So without changes in that program on the funding level, certainly it's going to become more and more competitive, and we want to make sure that we can maintain those efforts. I think they're valuable in our community and for our watersheds. And to have a potential grazing component to that, I think that's becoming more of a discussion item in regenerative agriculture and sustainability of our watersheds. So letter F is something that you agreed to having in the past and probably could stay. Letter G, support for allowing efficient access to data and local input of land spreading of human septage. I would propose, and I didn't include this at this time, but go beyond just human septage and include municipal waste and industrial waste, thinking about the hot topic of PFAS lately and the sources of where that may be being land applied. Yeah, we could add a couple of statements there just to try to acknowledge all septage, all municipal or industrial waste that's being land applied. And right now, it is difficult for us to track that information down, particularly when it comes to nutrient management planning. Technically, all nutrients that are applied to land in the state should follow a nutrient management plan. And that isn't limited to just farm nutrients, that's all nutrients. So having access to knowing where septage is applied could help us in some land management activities, as well as potentially it could impact comprehensive planning and other future local planning. And letter H, support a carbon farming pilot program that would provide grants to producers and producer-led groups who participate in a carbon market pilot program that would support the sequestration of carbon, reducing impacts on climate change, and support an alternative economic market for agriculture. I suggested deleting this from the agenda, primarily due to the effort for a carbon market pilot program, to my knowledge, is non-existent anymore. I think carbon, climate change, all of those things are still important, but as it pertains to a support of a particular program, I'm not aware of that program getting off the ground. So I would either suggest removing this altogether, or if you'd like to keep some sort of climate carbon talking points, maybe we could reword this to something different. And then the last, skip down to letter J. This was added on the heels of approving or adopting the Tanner Lake Rehabilitation District, and some concerns about absentee voting and needing to be present for the annual meeting for those decisions. So support for counties to retain, recommend revising chapter 33 to allow for absentee voting as a part of the annual meeting or a special meeting of a lake district. I haven't heard any action on that lately. Not many concerns have been brought to me as a result of the first annual meeting that the Lake District has had. But I would, I guess, venture to guess that there's still some concerns out there for that long term. So I didn't suggest removing it. So I guess in summary, letter C would be a question for you to think about, whether we want to keep that or reword that. And then letter H, whether we want to delete that or reword that as well. And then any other suggestions you might have regarding land use.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question for Chase.
Sure. Sure.
How can we rephrase D? I'm all for local involvement, but if you get a group of people on boards that are biased against modern ag, then that local group of people farming that area are going to be discriminated compared to other people in the state. So we got to have state standards if they're met, but yet I can still see where it'd be nice to have some local control. It's kind of a fine line there, but
yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head with why ATCP 51 was created in the first place, is because municipalities across the state were adopting different levels of regulation, and it created an uneasy atmosphere. And that's when the state and legislature stepped in to try to create a state standard to, I guess, limit or prevent some of the concerns that you have. I think, not knowing specifically how this might be reworded, but I think the hope would be to at least have maybe more of a say at the local level on input, maybe when decisions are made. Or, I guess it's up to the committee, is for you to decide what you want this to say, what your intention is. But certainly right now, concerns that we're seeing, and part of this maybe is related to some of the reasons that the town of Rock Creek is kicking around zoning again, is because of changes in the land use, intensification of certain operations, and it's raising levels of concern that they don't have any input on what happens. Yeah, I can certainly look at massaging the language a little bit and bring it back, unless you have specific suggestions right now. Maybe it's more of a the way it's presented when this is shared at the county board.
I think the
Right.
intention of number D was not inconsistent with what Gary's talking about. I mean, and I actually think personally think that it expresses it about as thoughtfully as you can, given the the sort of the tensions that arise whenever you talk about this issue. So I'm not in favor of changing it, but I wouldn't be totally opposed to it either if we have a suggestion.
Because I think that was one thing that came out of the CAFO study, was to have the groundwater study. And that could be like maybe implemented where CAFOs could go, because you can prove it, but. So,
Yeah, and that would be a good example of potentially the kind of local authority that that could become an element of CAFO approval. So anybody else have any comments or concerns about the other items?
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes.
I'm pretty supportive of the changes that Chase has recommended, and I think D is fine. I am tempted because C is so vague. And I'm not, I can't even remember those 15 recommendations. I mean, as it's worded now, I would take it out. It just doesn't seem to make any sense. And I agree with you on the carbon sequestration, whatever that is, letter H. I mean, let's just remove it. Let's not ask for things that we can't ever hope to see, or that we don't know what we're talking about.
I think there's certainly maybe a place for, if the committee's interested in talking about carbon and climate, just with the way, I mean, carbon markets, there's new things happening all the time. I just don't know what that would look like in the sense of in a legislative agenda at this time. So maybe something in the future, but.
Yeah, I agree with Diane.
It is hard the science is not clear at all about what works and doesn't work, and how well it works, and what the measurements are. So far the proposals have been stillborn pretty much, and they've been suggested but not able to be implemented for the most part. So I would support taking that item H out also. Do people want to approve something today, or is it okay to bring it back for a final review at our next meeting? I think we have time for that.
Well, I'll make it look pretty and bring it back.
Why don't we do that? If that's okay with everybody, and without objection, have Chase make it look pretty. And then we can maybe have a chance to look at it ahead of time, and then try and sort of nail it down. Otherwise, I really appreciate the staff's work on this. If there's any objection to that, that's what we'll do then. I think that's the last of the items that we had on our legislative agenda. There may be others, and there still would be an opportunity to bring those in if committee members want to. So let's leave that open also. So I think that concludes our agenda. Are there any announcements?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
That's Mike. On number 11, agenda items, I wonder if in the future we can discuss something that I've talked about with Ann, and then I've had in my neighborhood and other people talk to me about. And that's, if I have two separate parcels, I have a home on one, I can't really build an outbuilding on the other. And is that name it? Okay, and I'd like to bring that up for discussion as long as
Yes.
we're talking about zoning.
Okay, let's put it on the agenda for discussion. Yep. Anything else? Any other announcements? All right, then we're adjourned. Thanks for your patience with my illness here. I appreciate your
Get better, Tom.
allowing me to, yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody.